Hello, my name's Diana Rackham. I'm chairman of the Friends of Norfolk Dialect, FOND for short. We were asked by the Norfolk Record Office to put a talk together for you about what we do to help them celebrate Norfolk Day. So in this talk, what I'm going to do is tell you a little bit about what we get up to, and with the use of technology, I've also managed to interview via things like Zoom some of our current members, and they're going to be able to talk to you too. I hope you enjoy what we've got to say. Thank you. The Friends of Norfolk Dialect Fond is dedicated to conserving, recording and celebrating Norfolk's priceless linguistic and cultural heritage, thus keeping what we call Broad Norfolk alive. We were founded 20 years ago by that good old Norfolk character, Keith Skipper, and we've continued to do work in lots of different areas to help promote our Norfolk dialect. Hopefully this video will take you through some of those things. The first thing I'd like to tell you about is the recordings that we do, and I'm going to hand you over to Jean Eaglin, who was one of our stalwart members at the times when we were doing lots and lots of recordings. Unfortunately, we're not doing quite so many now, and if anybody would like to help with that, we'd be very grateful. Our recordings were ably sorted out by Stuart Orr and are also found at the Norfolk Record Office. So here's Jean Eaglin telling you about what she used to do.
Because I visited elderly folk, they were either for me to be a nurse to them or a carer. And I used to hear such funny stories, and I thought, gosh, one day I'd love to record them because they won't know, no one will know anything about all this. And then when FONDS started to have their recordings, I said, yes, I'd be happy to have a go to see if I could do that. Well, I had some fantastic stories because, as everybody know, I've done 79 recordings. And I do constantly listen back to some of them because they are such wonderful stories to remember everybody by. And if I hadn't have done my job, I feel, I wouldn't have known about doing this. Because you don't go out to people's houses if you don't know who they are and how they speak. And when you could hear them speaking in their Norfolk dialect as well, as the way I always speak, and I don't know any other, that would be absolutely a miss to have that not recorded.
Another aim of Friends of Norfolk Dialect is to work with television and radio and give advice to people and people that are trying to have a Norfolk accent when playing certain characters. So I'm going to introduce you now to Colin Burley, who has had this role in various television programmes, and he's going to share with you some of his stories.
One of the hardest things to do is to get somebody that doesn't live in Norfolk to speak with a Norfolk accent. I mean, actors and actresses have tried it and they just can't do it. But I was fortunate enough that I worked for an agent, a television, to supply people for television, to be asked to go over to Swaffham when Stephen Fry was recording Kingdom. And they asked me to try and teach some of the actors and actresses there to speak with a Norfolk accent. The first one I had to deal with was a lovely lady, Celia Imrie. You might know her, quite a well-known actress, been in Nuenda films. She invited me to her caravan, and I said to her, well, let me have a script. I think the easiest way to go about this is for me to write the words phonetically, as the Norfolk man would say them, or Norfolk person would say them. And she said, oh, that sounds fine. But she said, I can rehearse better or learn my words better if I'm lying flat on the floor. Do you mind if I did that? And I said, no. And she said, well, would you like to lay down on the floor with me? I thought that was quite nice, really. The problem was they can learn it when they're rehearsing it, but the minute they get in front of the camera, they're more concerned with remembering the lines and where they're going to stand and the action that they're going to portray, and the action goes out the window. The one guy who worked on that show with me was Trevor Peacock, who was on the Vicar of Dibley, and he could do a fairly good Norfolk accent. And again, a funny story. I was sitting in the garden with him having a cup of tea and a cake, and pointed to the school just over the fence. And I said, I went to that school. That's my chemistry lab over there. I said, do you know, the first week I was there, the headmaster didn't like the way I spoke, and he said he was going to knock my Norfolk accent out of me if it took the whole 5 years that I was at the school to do it. And Trevor said to me, well, he said, he didn't succeed, did he? I said, no, he didn't. I said, he said, is he alive now? I said, no, he's not. He did. He said, I bet he's turning over in his grave if he knew how much money they're paying you to tell people how to speak with a Norfolk accent.
In my time as chairman of the Friends of Norfolk Dialect, I've also had some interesting experiences with television and local radio. I think perhaps one of the most memorable was going down to London and being on the One Show and translating some of the Shirley Bassey lyrics into Norfolk dialect for her to then try and understand what we were talking about. And it was great because actually we could work alongside other local dialect organisations across the country, and it was interesting to meet other people who share a similar passion but for their local area. So the Dame Shirley Bassey lyrics that we had were beautiful words I'll mardle into your lug. So lovely words that I will chat into your ear. And I did also think that it'd be really good to say a rare old booty, so trick-lated up, good looking, so refined. So yeah, it's some interesting experiences, and also I've done lots of different things on radio. Recently during lockdown, I talked to the Norfolk and Norwich Festival, and they wanted me to do a bit of a quiz for the people that were listening there, and I thought that might be of interest to you now. So my first question is, where might you find a tittermatorta? Have a little think about that. My second question is the playing outside the Forum in Norwich. What's the origin of the word playing? Okay. I've given you a bit of a clue on the next one. What would you be doing if you were having a marble? Now, the next one. What sort of animal is a bishy Barnaby? So that might be a ladybird, it might be a snail, or it might be a donkey. What do you think it is? And then the last question, do you anchor hardy? It's a famous saying that Nelson is said to have said. Do we think that's a question or a statement? So going back to the beginning of our quiz, where might you find a tittermatorta? Tittermatorta is our word for seesaw, so you might find it in the local park. What would you be doing if you were having a marble? You'd be having a chat. The playing outside the Forum, the origin of the word playing is Dutch, and in fact we've got a few Dutch words in our dialect which have come over when the strangers came over to help in Norwich. Other words include dweil, which is floor cloth. The animal that is a bishy Barnaby is a ladybird. We mentioned a snail. Some people might call that a dodderman. We mentioned a donkey, and some people might call that a dicky. And the do you anchor hardy, putting do you in front of a statement is something quite typical of Norfolk, so it's a statement, not a question. Now, something else that the Friends of Norfolk Dialect do, but perhaps not quite so much at the moment, is to get involved in local education, because the children obviously are the future, and although dialect's an ever-changing thing, we still think it's really important that the children should be proud of how they speak and where they come from. So I'm going to hand you over to Norman Hart, who's going to talk to you about one of the projects we did a few years ago now to help educate some of the local children.
Hello. Quite some time ago, FOND had a big project with schools. It all started with an ex-pupil of mine and a student at UEA who I was teaching level 1 hockey umpiring to, who were great friends and had a lecturer who was very keen on Norfolk dialect. This lecturer and Peter Trudgill laid on a course for teachers for Norfolk County Council so they could better understand why Norfolk children wrote and spoke in the way they do. And as a result of that, we launched a programme for 9 schools. Each school was allocated some time with rig-a-jig-jig, produce something in the way of traditional music or dance, or spin-off productions so they could produce some sort of drama production, but with a local theme. Everybody had a day's training with Peter Trudgill and Ken Lodge at the Professional Development Centre, and then off the schools went with a budget and a recorder so they could record 30 local people speaking in their local voice. And the project lasted the whole of the summer term, culminating with an exhibition in the Forum at Norwich that lasted a fortnight in late July and early August, showcasing what had been produced. Can you believe little old Norfolk made the Times, a whole half page, the Guardian, and Radio 4. So that was one of the most exciting things I've been involved in my time with Friends of Norfolk Dialect.
Now, one of the hardest things to do, and something we're often asked by people, is how to write the Norfolk dialect down. Now, there's really no definitive answer to this, and lots of people have their own styles and their own ways of doing things. And the boy John, he always said, I write as I speak and I spell as I please. And for a lot of people, that seems to work. The boy John, to us, is somebody who has really got the knack of being able to write the Norfolk dialect down. And if you do have the privilege of reading some of the letters that he's put together, then you can really see how he managed to do this. I did manage to talk to a lady called Sheila Ollie, who is been the voice of Aunt Agatha on various recordings, and then Aunt Agatha, as she'll explain, is a character within the Boy John letters. So over to Sheila.
In the late 1940s and early 1950s, a gentleman called Sidney Grates, who was a resident of Potterham, began writing letters to the EDP. These letters were amusing and later became valuable documents detailing Norfolk life at that time. They were written in Norfolk dialect, always ending with words of wisdom from a character known as Aunt Agatha. These are a few of Aunt Agatha's sayings. Here we go. Aunt Agatha, she say, the only ordinary people in our villages are them what think they aren't. Grandfa say, salt is what make your taters taste nasty if you don't put it in. Aunt Agatha, she say, that's no good of putting your foot down if you hain't got a leg to stand on. Aunt Agatha, she say, never hit a man when he's down. He might get up again. Aunt Agatha, she say, reality is when you leave dirty dishes in the sink and then beggars are still there when you get home. Aunt Agatha, she say, that ain't what girls know nowadays, what bother their parents. That's how they found out. And Aunt Agatha, she say, if you want to keep friends with the people in your village, keep off the parish council.
Continuing on with the writing theme, I'd like to introduce you to our Merry Mawkin. And Mawkin is our dialect word for scarecrow. In fact, that's our logo, Friends of Norfolk Dialect logo, with a scarecrow in the middle, or Mawkin, and designed by cartoonist Tony Hall. Now, the Merry Mawkin magazine, it's full of stories, history, poems, photographs, our recipes, all sorts of things, little bits of quiz here to test your Norfolk knowledge. And lots of our members really enjoy reading these and getting their copy. And they are also available on our website. You can download them and read them from there. One of the things that's in this summer 2020 edition of the Merry Morgan are some of our Trosher competition winners, and that is our writing competition. Something we do to encourage people to continue to use the dialect and to tell their stories. I'm going to pass you over to Zena now, who's on the FOND committee and has entered the Trosher competition in the past.
I'm Zena, and I joined FOND in 2016, and I entered the Trosher competition that they hold every year. And imagine my surprise and delight when I won with my first poem. So here's the poem that kicked it all off, that I won with in 2016, and it's called Norfolk Through and Through. I was born and brought up in Norwich, a Tuxford belle and proud, but Mum and Dad were Londoners. So am I still allowed to call myself a dumpling? I do hope that's the case, because apart from sojourning in Cambridge, I always lived in this place. I paddled at Harford Bridges, picnicked at Dunstan Common, paddled along the coastline, and boated into Wroxham. I was a schoolgirl at Tuxford Infants, went from Harford to the Hurt, was an athlete for my county, though now I couldn't plumb well do it. My Saturday job was at Carrowwood, selling hot dogs to the crowd, back when the Canaries first went up, and weren't we all hully proud? Then I went to study and had to move away. I got my degree, come straight back home. That was a happy day. I then become a teacher in a Norfolk school, of course, and learned all them their northers and put up with their sauce. Now, I looked into family history and found to my surprise that my ancestors, they weren't Londoners, but born under Norfolk skies, in Kenninghall and in Fawnsett, as I did discover, not far from where I settled now, in sunny Dickleborough. So there, I am a dumpling, Norfolk through and through, and here is where my heart lies, and different I shall do.
Another thing we do in FOND is to have what we call FOND Do's, and we have these at least a couple of times a year, and they're a great opportunity to get people together and to hear other people's stories. Sometimes we listen to people giving a talk on a particular subject, and sometimes we just listen to Norfolk stories and people doing what we call Norfolk Squid. We're very lucky to be in contact with various Norfolk characters that have their own style of Norfolk Squid, and I've asked two of them to share some of their squid with you now. So I'm going to hand you over to the Norfolk Nut, also known as Pat Learney, and Tina Chamberlain, the gal Tina, and you'll hear some squid from them.
My favourite Norfolk jokes. The first one, as my mate Billy, he decided to go into pig keeping. He bought an old sow, took it home, all that did all day was roll in the mud. So we went down the pub on the Monday night, he said to his mate, he said, I bought this old sow, all that did was roll in the mud, I don't know what's up with it. His mate said, I'm glad you asked me. He said, because I'm a pig expert. I know exactly what's up with that. That one to see a boar. He said, well, I don't know anyone who's got a boar. He said, of course you do. He said, old Charlie, about half a mile down the road, he got a boar. He only charged a couple of quid. That's for the boar, not for Charlie. So he get this old sow, he stick it in the wheelbarrow, off he go down to Charlie's, he put the sow in with the boar do his business, we won't go into that. He give Charlie a couple of quid, he said to him, how will I know if that's took? Charlie said, well, if that's took, he said, in the morning that'll be standing up eating grass. He said, thanks very much, put it back in the wheelbarrow, took it home. Next morning, got up, looked out the window, old sow rolling in the mud again. He thought, blasted. put it back in a wheelbarrow, took it down to Charlie's. The old boy did his business. He gave Charlie a couple of quid, put it back in a wheelbarrow, took it home. Next morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, he knocked on his missus and said, "Get up and have a look, see what the old sower's doing." I doesn't. So she got up, she pulled the curtain back. He said, "Is it rolling in the mud?" He said, "No." She said, "No." He said, "Is it standing up eating grass?" She said, "No, that's sitting in the wheelbarrow."
Another thing we can now do in this here pandemic, we can go fishing. I happen to be talking about fishing to this old boy called Percy. I used to go and see him in a care home. And he was a lovely old boy, he really was. And he sat me one day, he said, "Gal, you like fishing, don't you?" I said, "Yes." "Well," he said, "me and my mate Bob, we used to go," he said, "and this is a true tale," he said. "We used to go sea fishing," he said, and we used to go about 2 mile out and catch 'em. But he said there was a bloke in the pub out there. He said, and he allus wanted to come with us. He said, well, he said, me and him knew that he wouldn't be no good. He didn't know nothing about fishing. But we come up with a plan. We said what we'd do, we'd wait, that was a bit choppy, you know. He said we'd take him with us then. We knew he wouldn't stick that, and he wouldn't ask us no more. Well, we had a look in the paper, and this coming weekend, he said that was going to be a bit choppy. So we said, "Come on, Ted, you can come with us." Well, we got about a couple of mile out. He said, me and Bob, we got our lines out. He said, we started fishing. He said, "Oh, Ted, he disappeared." He said, "He wasn't been very well at the back." He said, "We knew that'd happen." He said, "Well, the best part sometime," he said, "he come round that boot." He said his top teeth had gone. He said, "You'll never guess what's happened." He said, I said, "What's happened?" Well, he said, "I only got lost his top teeth," he said, "at the top of the boot, at the bottom of the boot." So he said, I said, "Well, that don't matter, boy. Don't you worry about that," he said. He didn't know nothing about fishing, he said. So I took my top teeth out. He said, and I tied it up on my line, and I say to him, "I'll try and catch him for you." He said, so he said, I threw my line out. He said, and after a little while, he said, I just brought it in again, he said, and I said, "Look at this, Ted," he said. "I got your teeth," he said. So I undone them, put 'em on my hand, he said. I said, "Here, boy." Well, he said, he took them out of my hand, gal, and he went like this, looked at 'em. "They aren't my buggers," he said, and he threw 'em back. He said, and we both went home with no teeth in. Well, blast, didn't that make me laugh?
Of course, along with Norfolk Squit, our fondue evenings sometimes also include songs. And one of the most famous singers using the Norfolk dialect was, of course, the singing postman. So next you're going to hear from Gary Mears, who's a member of the Blakeney Old Wild Rovers, and a group we work quite a lot with FOND. And he's going to sing you one of the singing postman's songs, "Mind Your Head, Boy." And then you're going to hear from my mum and her partner Barry, who have written their own song in celebration of Norfolk. Both of these were sung at our fondue to celebrate 20 years of Fond last September. And I hope you enjoy them, and you also join in on the choruses.
Now I was born in Cromer Town 30 year ago. It were a rare old pokey town, I think you ought to know. They took me on the promenade, they took me on the sand. The first words they said to me when I fell out of the pram was, "Mind your head, boy, mind your head." Now there's a lot of people now who'd never be dead if they only had the sense to mind their head. If you never heard me say, I'll tell you all today, mind your head, boy, mind your head. Now Granny Polly Stooky Blues cockles stand for on the shore. Granny Polly Stooky Blues, you won't see them no more. Just before she passed away, just before she died, she said to me feebly, "When you're in the tide, mind your head, boy, mind your head." There's a lot of people now who'd never be dead if they only had the sense to mind their head. If you never heard me say, I'll tell you all today, mind your head, boy, mind your head. Now when I was just a totty boy, when I was still at school, Dopey was the clever one, I was just a fool, can't believe that. Teacher used to bury up and hurl the books at me, and all the boys behind me used to holler merrily, mind your head, boy, mind your head. There's a lot of people now who'd never be dead, if they only had the sense to mind their head. If you never heard me say, I'll tell you all today, mind your head, boy, mind your head. The chroma girls are all alive down along the prom. Now if you'd like to tackle one, you can come along. But should you ever take a girl to be your wedded wife, you'll be eating nagged pie all the rest of your life. So mind your head, boy, mind your head. There's a lot of people now who'd never be dead, if they only had the sense to mind their head. If you never heard me say, I'll tell you all today, mind your head, boy, mind your head.
As I travel round Norfolk, my heart is intent on finding real ale on which money can be spent. As I trundle down lanes under wide Norfolk skies, I find lots of breweries, what a lovely surprise. There is real ale from Reedham, real ale from Sol, real ale from Hindringham, the best of them all. The beer in our county, it's clear and it's bright, and I'll sample some more before I go home tonight. I sample the food, it is such a delight. Delia's dumplings always turn out just right. A nice chroma crab and some Bingham blue cheese. Yarmouth fair buttons are certain to please. It's time for 11's with a Norfolk shortcake, hot from the oven like Granny used to make. Samphire from Saltus and cockles from Stookie. Rowdham is home to Norfolk's malt whisky. There is real ale from Reedham, real ale from Sol, real ale from Hindringham, the best of them all. The beer in our county, it's clear and it's bright, and I'll sample some more before I go home tonight. I continue my travels round Norfolk so fair, and see some grand houses beyond all compare. There is Blickling and Felbrigg, Oxborough and Houghton, Sandringham and Kerstead, Holcombe and Houghton. The Broads are such fun, so we sail there all day. The coast golden sand is ideal for a play. The castle in Norwich imposing and grand. Cliffs at Hunstanton boast wet stripy sand. There is real ale from Reedham, real ale from Sol, real ale from Hindringham, the best of them all. The beer in our county, it's clear and it's bright, and I'll sample some more before I go home tonight. Our county is famous for heroic Lord Nelson. We all like to suck with inventive James Dyson, and we all remember Bernard Matthews' wisecrack about his beautiful turkeys, all Norfolk and black. And Boylan's ghost walks around Blickling Hall and black shuck's a dog which will frighten us all. So what you can't beat is a good Norfolk tale, washed down with a pint of real Norfolk ale. There is real ale from Reedham, real ale from Sol, real ale from Hindringham, the best of them all. The beer in our county, it's clear and it's bright, and I'll sample some more before I go home tonight.
One of our most popular fondues is our annual pantomime in January. It happens in East England Village Hall. I'm going to give you a sneaky peek at one we managed to record in 2017. You'll see that all of the cast have their scripts with them. That's because they often don't actually get to see them until the day. It's certainly homegrown entertainment.
Here we are together. That's panto time once more. I know that's all a bit old hat, and you've seen it all before. But this year we're doing something different. We're keeping it local, you see. Galdottis are going to Suffolk, sooner harder than me. There should be somebody coming up there now, but they haven't got there they come again. Come on. You're supposed to clap when she goes. Now, Dottie have a special friend. Tutu, that's his name. He was a scruffy little dog who loved to play a game. Em and Henry worked very hard in the fields all day. Dottie, all she wanted to do is run about and play.
If you'd like to see the rest of the 2017 pantomime, then do get in touch and I'll try and share it with you. You're now going to see some pictures from other pantomimes that we've done in the past at East England Village Hall, and they're going to be accompanied by music from the occasional Cayley Band, who are really good supporters of FOND. And you'll see that they've been trying to practice their social distancing while recording this piece of music in one of our members' gardens. Well, thank you for taking the time to watch our video about the Friends of Norfolk Dialect. I hope you enjoyed seeing and hearing about what we get up to. We do have a website and a Facebook page if you're interested about finding out more, and you can get in touch with me via email or by phone, and contact details can be found on there. So it leaves me to say thank you to everybody who contributed to making this video. I've really enjoyed having the opportunity to find out your stories, and let's finish with a traditional Norfolk goodbye. Fare you well together, and keep you a troshin'. Cheerio.